Imagine a place where the dust is not just dust, and the whispers are not just the wind. I got a job at an antique shop thinking it would be quiet, but I quickly learned it has a very specific client and a very unsettling history. Stay tuned to discover the strange guidelines I had to follow and the dark secrets hidden within these walls. My name is Harper and I am 23 years old. I moved to Hollow Creek 6 months ago looking for a fresh start after dropping out of graduate school. The town sits tucked between dense pine forests and fog-draped hills, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone and strangers are noticed immediately. I needed work, something simple and undemanding while I figured out what to do with my life. When I saw the Help Wanted sign in the window of Holloway's Antique Emporium, I thought it was perfect. The shop stood on Maple Street, a narrow road, lined with century-old buildings that leaned slightly toward each other as if sharing secrets. The Emporium itself was a 3-story Victorian structure with peeling paint, the color of old bones and windows so dusty they looked opaque from the outside. A hand-painted sign swung gently above the entrance, creaking on rusty chains even when there was no wind. I pushed open the heavy wooden door on a gray Tuesday morning in late September. A bell chimed somewhere deep inside, the sound oddly muffled, as if the air itself absorbed it. The interior smelled of aged wood, mothballs, and something else I could not quite identify, something metallic and faintly sweet like old pennies left in the rain. The shop was a labyrinth. Narrow aisles twisted between towering shelves crammed with objects from every era imaginable. Victorian oil lamps sat beside mid-century radios. Tarnished silverware spilled from wooden crates. Dusty paintings in gilded frames leaned against walls, their subjects' eyes seeming to follow movement through the room. In one corner stood a collection of porcelain dolls, their glassy stares unsettling even in the dim light filtering through the grimy windows. "You must be Harper." The voice came from behind a massive oak counter near the back of the shop. I had not seen anyone when I entered. A woman emerged from the shadows, tall and thin, perhaps in her 60s, with silver hair pulled into a severe bun. She wore a high-necked black dress that looked like it belonged in a daguerreotype. Her pale blue eyes studied me with an intensity that made me want to look away. "Yes," I said, extending my hand. "I am here about the job." She did not shake my hand. Instead, she nodded slowly, her gaze never leaving my face. "I am Mrs. Holloway. I own this establishment. You are punctual. That is good. Punctuality matters here more than you might think." There was something about the way she said it, an emphasis on the word "here" that made the hair on my arm stand up. I brushed it off as nerves. "The position is simple," Mrs. Holloway continued, walking around the counter with barely a sound despite the old floorboards. "You will open the shop at 9 o'clock in the morning. You will assist customers. You will dust, organize, and maintain inventory. You will close at 6 o'clock in the evening. On Thursdays and Saturdays, you will work until 9 o'clock in the evening." She paused, her thin fingers tracing the edge of a nearby shelf. "However, this shop has certain protocols that must be followed without exception. These are not suggestions. They are rules, and they exist for very specific reasons." From beneath the counter, she produced a leather-bound notebook, its cover worn smooth with age. She opened it to reveal pages filled with neat, old-fashioned handwriting. The ink looked almost brown, as if the words had been written decades ago. "Read these," she said, turning the notebook toward me. "Read them carefully. If you cannot follow them, this position is not for you." I looked down at the page. 4 rules were written there, numbered and underlined. Rule 1. If you hear footsteps coming from the attic, leave whatever you are doing and go downstairs immediately. Rule 2. If you find a key that does not belong to any lock in the shop, throw it into the fireplace immediately. Rule 3. Any item that falls from a shelf must be sold to the next customer who enters regardless of price. Rule 4. Do not speak to anyone in the shop after midnight if you are alone. I read them twice, waiting for Mrs. Holloway to laugh or explain that this was some kind of quirky tradition meant to unsettle new employees. She did not laugh. She watched me with those pale eyes, her expression completely serious. "I do not understand," I said finally. "Why would I be here after midnight? You said the shop closes at 6 or 9 on some nights. Sometimes inventory work requires evening hours, she replied. Sometimes unexpected situations arise. The rules exist regardless of whether you understand them. Do you accept the position or not? I needed the job. My savings were nearly gone, and Hollow Creek did not exactly overflow with employment opportunities. The rules were strange, sure, but they seemed harmless enough. How hard could it be to follow 4 simple guidelines? I accept, I said. Mrs. Holloway's expression did not change, but something flickered in her eyes. Relief? Resignation? I could not tell. You start today, she said. I will show you the inventory system and where everything is kept. Pay attention. I will not repeat myself. The next 3 hours passed in a blur of information. Mrs. Holloway moved through the shop with surprising speed, pointing out the organization system that seemed to follow no logic I could discern. The Victorian items were not grouped together. The furniture was scattered across all 3 floors. When I asked about the system, she simply said, "Things go where they belong. You will learn." The second floor was accessed by a narrow staircase hidden behind a heavy curtain. It contained mostly furniture, chairs, tables, wardrobes, bed frames, all arranged in tight clusters that left barely enough room to walk between them. The air up there felt heavier somehow, and colder despite the warm September day outside. The third floor, Mrs. Holloway said, stopping at another staircase even narrower than the first, is the attic. You have no reason to go up there. It is storage for items not yet processed. I handle that area myself. I remembered Rule 1. What about the footsteps? I asked before I could stop myself. She turned to look at me, and for the first time I saw something almost like sadness cross her face. Old buildings settle, pipes expand and contract, wood shifts. Sometimes it sounds like footsteps. Sometimes it sounds like other things. The rule exists so you do not waste time investigating every little noise. If you hear something from up there, simply go downstairs. That is all. Her explanation made sense, but the way she said it, the careful neutrality of her tone, made me think there was more to it. I did not press further. By noon, Mrs. Holloway left me alone behind the counter with instructions to familiarize myself with the inventory ledger, an enormous handwritten book that seemed to date back to the shop's founding in 1887. She disappeared, through a door I had not noticed before, one that blended seamlessly with the wood-paneled wall. The shop was quiet. No customers came. I flipped through the ledger, noting the meticulous entries. Each item had a description, a date of acquisition, and often a brief note about its origin. Some entries were straightforward. Oak dining table, purchased from Carpenter Estate, June 1923. Others were more cryptic. Silver hand mirror, origin unknown, found in basement, do not display. I paused on that entry. Found in the basement? Why would something found in the building itself be treated as inventory? And why not display it? The bell above the door chimed, making me jump. An elderly man shuffled in, leaning heavily on a cane. He did not look at me, did not acknowledge my greeting. He moved directly to a shelf near the window and picked up a small wooden box, examined it briefly, then set it down and left without a word. The whole interaction took maybe 30 seconds. Weird, but I was in no position to judge customer behavior. The afternoon crawled by. I dusted shelves, rearranged some items that seemed out of place, and tried not to think about how isolated I felt in the shop, despite being in the middle of town. Around 4 o'clock, I heard it for the first time, footsteps. They came from above me, slow, deliberate footsteps crossing the floor directly overhead. I looked up at the ceiling, tracking the sound as it moved from one side of the building to the other. Mrs. Holloway was up there, I told myself. She said she handled the attic storage, but I had not heard her go up there. I had not heard the staircase creak. The footsteps stopped directly above the counter where I stood. I held my breath, listening. For a long moment there was nothing. Then, very faintly, I heard something else. It sounded like humming. A melody I did not recognize, thin and wavering, like someone very old or very young singing to themselves. Rule 1 echoed in my mind. If you hear footsteps coming from the attic, Leave whatever you are doing and go downstairs immediately." I was already downstairs, the first floor. But the unease that crept up my spine told me I should move even further away from the sound. I walked to the front of the shop, as far from the counter as possible, and pretended to organize a display of old books near the window. The humming stopped. The footsteps did not resume. After 5 minutes, I cautiously returned to the counter. Mrs. Holloway emerged from the hidden door an hour later, looking exactly as she had when she left. "Any problems?" she asked. "No," I lied. "It has been quiet." She studied my face for a moment, then nodded. "Good. You may leave at 6. Lock the front door, but leave the back entrance unlocked. I will close up later tonight." "You are staying?" I asked. "I often do," she said, offering no further explanation. I gathered my jacket and bag, suddenly eager to leave. As I reached the door, Mrs. Holloway called out, "Harper?" I turned back. "The rules," she said quietly. "They are not arbitrary. Remember that." I nodded and stepped out into the fading daylight, the bell chiming behind me. The fresh air hit my face, and I realized I had been holding tension in my shoulders for hours. I took a deep breath and started walking home, trying to shake the feeling that something in the shop had been watching me all day. That night, I lay in bed in my small rented room above the bakery on Oak Street, replaying the day in my mind. The rules seemed less quirky now and more like warnings. But warnings about what? Old buildings made noises. Unusual items required unusual handling. Mrs. Holloway was eccentric, probably lonely, running a failing business in a dying town. There was a rational explanation for everything. I repeated that to myself until I fell asleep. But my dreams were filled with the sound of footsteps overhead, and that thin, wavering humming that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. The first week passed in a strange haze of monotony, punctuated by moments of acute unease. I fell into a routine quickly: arrive at 8:55 in the morning, unlock the front door, turn on the lights in the main showroom, and take my place behind the counter. Mrs. Holloway appeared every day around noon, worked in silence for a few hours, then vanished back through that hidden door or up to the attic. We rarely spoke beyond the essential exchange of information about sales or inventory. Customers were few and far between. When they did come, they often exhibited the same odd behavior as the first man I had seen, entering with purpose, moving directly to a specific item as if they knew exactly what they were looking for, and leaving without much conversation. Some paid in cash, counting out exact change from worn leather wallets. Others used credit cards so old and scratched I was surprised they still worked. I began to notice patterns in the shop itself. Certain items seemed to move. Not dramatically, not in ways I could definitively point to, but subtly. A vase I was sure I had dusted on the left side of a shelf would be on the right side the next day. A stack of books I had organized by size would be in a different order when I returned from lunch. I told myself I was misremembering, that my mind was playing tricks in the cluttered, poorly lit space. On my 5th day, a glass paperweight fell from a shelf while I was organizing nearby. It did not roll off. There was no vibration, no obvious cause. It simply fell, hitting the floor with a sharp crack that splintered it into 3 pieces. Rule 3. Any item that falls from a shelf must be sold to the next customer who enters regardless of price. I stared at the broken paperweight, my heart racing. How could I sell something that was now damaged, and why would anyone want it? But the rule was clear. I picked up the pieces, wrapped them carefully in tissue paper, and placed them on the counter. 20 minutes later, the bell chimed. A woman in her 40s entered, her eyes red-rimmed as if she had been crying. She approached the counter directly, ignoring everything else in the shop. "Do you have anything new?" she asked, her voice rough. "This just became available," I said, unwrapping the paperweight pieces. "It is damaged, but I will take it," she interrupted. "How much?" I had no idea how to price it. $20, I said uncertainly. She pulled out her wallet and handed me $40. "Keep the change." "Thank you." Before I could respond, she took the wrapped pieces and left. The entire interaction took less than 2 minutes. I stood there, holding the money, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The woman had not asked why the paperweight was broken or even really looked at it. She had wanted something new, something that had just become available, and she had taken it without question. That evening, I asked Mrs. Holloway about it. She was preparing to leave, putting on a long black coat that looked as outdated as her dress. "The third rule," I said. "Why does it matter that something fell? Why does it have to be sold to the next customer?" Mrs. Holloway buttoned her coat slowly, her movements deliberate. "Because the shop chooses what needs to leave," she said. "Some items carry attachments, energies, memories. When something falls, it means the shop has decided that object needs a new home. The next customer who enters is meant to receive it. Interfering with that process causes imbalance." "Imbalance?" I echoed. She picked up a worn leather handbag. "Things must flow properly, Harper. In and out. The shop is not merely a collection of objects. It is a repository, a way station. What comes here often comes for a reason, and what leaves must leave for a reason. The rules maintain that balance." Before I could ask what she meant by repository or way station, she left, the door closing softly behind her. I was beginning to understand that Mrs. Holloway was not eccentric. She was deadly serious about these rules, and she truly believed that they served a vital purpose. That night, I did something I probably should not have. I stayed late. Mrs. Holloway had mentioned I might need to do inventory work in the evenings, and I had keys to the shop now. I told myself I wanted to get ahead on organizing the second floor, but the truth was simpler. I was curious. The shop felt different when I was alone there during the day, and I wanted to understand why. I returned at 8 o'clock in the evening, well after closing. Maple Street was empty, the streetlights casting long shadows between the old buildings. The shop looked different at night, its windows like dead eyes reflecting nothing. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. Without the weak daylight filtering through the windows, the interior was very dark. I fumbled for the light switch near the door and flipped it. The overhead lights flickered on, buzzing faintly, illuminating the cluttered showroom in harsh yellow light. Everything looked wrong. That is the only way I can describe it. The objects were in the same places, the layout unchanged, but something about the atmosphere had shifted. The air felt thicker, harder to breathe. The shadows between shelves seemed darker, more substantial. I told myself I was being ridiculous and headed for the stairs to the second floor. I would organize for an hour, maybe 2, and then go home. Simple. The stairs creaked under my weight, each step loud in the silence. The second floor was even darker despite the lights I turned on. The furniture cast strange shadows, creating the illusion of figures standing between the wardrobes and chairs. I began sorting through a box of old photographs someone had donated, organizing them by decade based on the clothing and hairstyles. The work was mindless, soothing. I lost track of time. Then I heard it again, footsteps from above. I froze, a black and white photograph of a family frozen mid-laugh in my hand. The footsteps were slow and measured, moving across the attic floor directly overhead, back and forth, back and forth. Rule 1. If you hear footsteps coming from the attic, leave whatever you are doing and go downstairs immediately. But I was curious now, too curious. Mrs. Holloway was not here. No one was here. So who or what was walking up there? The footsteps stopped. In the silence that followed, I heard something else. That humming again. The same thin melody I had heard on my first day. It sounded closer, now, as if whoever was humming had moved to the top of the attic stairs. My hands trembled as I set down the photograph. Every instinct screamed at me to follow the rule, to go downstairs, to leave. But another part of me, the part that had always pushed boundaries and asked too many questions, wanted to understand. I stood up slowly and moved toward the narrow staircase that led to the attic. The humming continued, rising and falling in a melody that was almost familiar but not quite, like a song heard in a dream. I placed one foot on the bottom step. The humming stopped instantly. The silence that followed was absolute. No creaking wood, no settling house, nothing. Just oppressive, suffocating silence. Then I heard my name. Harper. It was a whisper, barely audible, coming from the darkness at the top of the stairs. A woman's voice, old and papery, but not Mrs. Holloway's voice, someone else. Harper, come upstairs. Every hair on my body stood on end. I backed away from the staircase, my breath coming in short gasps. The temperature had dropped. I could see my breath fogging in front of my face. Harper, we have been waiting. That single word broke whatever foolish curiosity had held me there. I turned and ran, stumbling down the stairs to the first floor, my footsteps thundering through the shop. I did not stop until I reached the front door, fumbling with the locks. My hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the deadbolt. I burst out onto Maple Street and kept running until I reached the corner where I finally stopped, bent over, gasping for air. When I looked back at the shop, every window was dark. I had left the lights on. I did not go back that night. I went home, locked my door, and lay in bed staring at the ceiling until dawn, trying to convince myself I had imagined it. The voice, the cold, the lights going out, but I had not imagined it. Deep down I knew I had not imagined any of it. The next morning I almost did not go to work. I stood outside the shop at 8:55, my hand on the door handle, trying to gather the courage to go inside. But I needed this job. I needed the money. And some stubborn part of me refused to be chased away by whatever was in that building. I went in. Mrs. Holloway was already there, standing behind the counter as if she had been waiting for me. She looked at me for a long moment, her pale eyes seeing far more than I wanted her to. "You stayed late last night," she said. It was not a question, I nodded, not trusting my voice. "And you did not follow the first rule. How did you know?" I whispered. She came around the counter, moving close enough that I could smell lavender and something else, something like old incense. "Because you are still here," she said quietly. "If you had gone up into the attic, you would not be standing in front of me right now. You would be gone and I would be looking for a new employee." Again. The word again hung in the air between us. "What is up there?" I asked. Mrs. Holloway was silent for a long moment. Finally, she said, "The shop has been here since 1887. Many people have worked here. Many people have owned items that passed through these doors. Not all of them have moved on. Some remain, Harper. Some are tied to objects, to memories, to the building itself. The attic is where the strongest presences congregate. It is where the veil is thinnest. The rule exists to keep you safe from something you cannot possibly understand or control. Ghosts," I said, the word feeling strange in my mouth. "You are talking about ghosts." "I am talking about energies that persist beyond death," she corrected. "Call them what you like, but they are real and they are dangerous if provoked or engaged. The rules are not suggestions, Harper. They are the difference between working here safely and becoming another tragedy this building will absorb." She walked past me to the front door, turning the sign from closed to open. "If you want to leave, I understand. But if you stay, you must follow the rules. All of them. Without exception. Do you understand?" I should have left. Any sane person would have left. But I thought about my empty bank account, my lack of prospects, and the strange pull I felt toward the shop despite everything. Something in me needed to understand what was happening here. "I understand," I said. Mrs. Holloway nodded once. "Good. Then let us get to work. And Harper? Do not stay late again unless I am here with you." I spent the rest of the day in a daze, jumping at every small sound, watching the shadows between shelves for movement. But the shop was quiet. No footsteps. No humming. No whispered voices calling my name. Just the slow tick of an old grandfather clock near the back wall, and the occasional chime of the bell when a customer entered. Before I go further, I want to pause here and say something. If you are enjoying this story, if it is giving you chills or making you think twice about the old shops in your own town, do me a favor. Hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this take time to put together, and your support means I can keep bringing you these true accounts of the strange and unexplainable. Share this with someone who loves a good scare. Trust me, you will want to discuss this one. And leave a comment. Have you ever worked somewhere that felt wrong? Somewhere with rules that did not make sense until it was too late? I would love to hear your experiences. Now, where was I? Oh yes, the second week. I made it through the rest of that week by following the rules religiously and avoiding the upper floors unless absolutely necessary. Mrs. Holloway seemed pleased with my caution, though she never directly mentioned the incident again. We settled into an uneasy routine, her cryptic presence and my careful compliance creating a strange working relationship built on unspoken understanding. It was on a Thursday evening, during one of the late shifts, that I first noticed the music box. The shop was open until 9 o'clock on Thursdays and Saturdays, and those evening shifts had a different quality to them. The few customers who came during those hours were quieter, more secretive. They spoke in hushed tones and often paid in cash. Mrs. Holloway told me these were the serious collectors, people who knew exactly what they wanted and were willing to pay premium prices for. At around 7:30, with the sun setting outside and long shadows creeping across the showroom floor, I was dusting a shelf near the back when I saw it. A music box I did not remember seeing before. It was exquisite, made of dark walnut wood with intricate silver inlay depicting a garden scene. Roses and ivy twisted around the edges, and the clasp was shaped like a tiny silver bird. I picked it up carefully. It was heavier than I expected, solid and cold in my hands. There was no tag, no price, no entry card indicating where it came from or when it arrived. I opened the inventory ledger and flipped through the recent entries. Looking for any mention of a music box, I carried it to the counter, intending to ask Mrs. Holloway about it when she emerged from the back. I set it down and returned to my dusting, but I kept glancing at it. There was something about the box that drew my attention, made it hard to focus on anything else. At 8:15, Mrs. Holloway appeared. She stopped when she saw the music box on the counter. Her expression did not change, but I saw her hands clench briefly at her sides. "Where did you find that?" she asked, her voice very quiet. "On a shelf in the back," I said. "It is not in the ledger. I thought maybe it was new inventory that had not been processed yet." She moved closer, staring down at the box but not touching it. "Put it back where you found it, now." The urgency in her voice made me move immediately. I picked up the box and started toward the back of the shop. "Mrs. Holloway, what is wrong?" "What is this?" "Put it back," she repeated, "and do not touch it again." I returned the music box to the shelf where I had found it, placing it carefully between a stack of old books and a tarnished silver tea set. When I came back to the counter, Mrs. Holloway was writing something in a small notebook I had not seen before. "That item is not for sale," she said without looking up. "It should not be on display. I will move it to storage tonight." "What is it?" I asked. She closed the notebook and finally met my eyes. "A mistake. That music box was donated to the shop 30 years ago by a family settling an estate. I should have refused it, but I was younger then and did not understand some things as well as I do now. It has been in the attic storage ever since. It should not have been downstairs. What happens if someone plays it?" I asked. Mrs. Holloway's expression grew very cold. "Nothing good, Harper. Nothing good at all." She would not elaborate further, and I knew better than to push. But as the evening wore on and closing time approached, I could not stop thinking about the music box. What made it different from all the other items in the shop? Why had it appeared downstairs when it was supposed to be in storage? At 9 o'clock, I closed out the register and prepared to leave. Mrs. Holloway was upstairs on the second floor. I could hear her moving around up there. I was putting on my jacket when I heard music. It came from the back of the shop, a delicate tinkling melody that was hauntingly beautiful. The sound of a music box playing. I froze. No one was back there. I was alone on the first floor. But the music continued, the melody winding through the shop like smoke. Rule 2. If you find a key that does not belong to any lock in the shop, throw it into the fireplace immediately. That was not the right rule, but another rule echoed in my mind, one Mrs. Holloway had mentioned during my first week. Never touch the music box after midnight. It was not midnight. It was only 9 o'clock. But I had not touched the music box. So why was it playing? I moved toward the back of the shop, each step feeling like wading through water. The music grew louder, clearer. It was the kind of melody that should have been comforting, but instead felt deeply wrong, like a lullaby sung in a cemetery. When I reached the shelf, the music box sat exactly where I had left it. But the lid was open. The tiny mechanism inside was turning, the silver cylinder rotating to pluck the precise teeth that created the melody. And standing in front of the music box, staring up at it, was a little girl. She could not have been more than 7 years old. She wore a white nightgown that seemed to glow slightly in the dim light, and her dark hair hung in 2 braids down her back. She was humming along with the music, swaying gently from side to side. "Hello?" I said, my voice barely audible over the melody. The girl did not turn around. She continued humming, her small hands clasped in front of her. "Are you lost?" I asked, taking a step closer. "Where are your parents?" She stopped humming. Slowly, very slowly, she turned to face me. Her eyes were completely black, not dark brown or dilated black, like looking into 2 deep wells that went nowhere. And when she smiled, her teeth seemed too sharp, too many. "She wants to dance," the girl said in a voice that did not match her appearance, a voice that sounded old and layered, as if multiple people were speaking in unison. "Will you dance with her?" I stumbled backward, my heart hammering. The girl took a step toward me, extending one pale hand. The music box played on, the melody speeding up now, becoming frantic. "Mrs. Holloway," I shouted, unable to take my eyes off the child. "Mrs. Holloway, help!" The girl took another step. She has been waiting so long in the dark. She just wants to dance. Footsteps thundered on the stairs. Mrs. Holloway appeared, took in the scene instantly, and moved faster than I had ever seen her move. She grabbed the music box and slammed the lid shut. The music cut off abruptly. The little girl vanished. One moment she was there, hand outstretched, and the next moment there was nothing but empty air and the fading scent of something sweet and rotten. I collapsed against the shelf, gasping for breath. Mrs. Holloway stood holding the closed music box, her face pale but composed. "Go home, Harper," she said quietly. "What was that?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "What was that thing?" "A manifestation," Mrs. Holloway said. "An echo of something that happened a very long time ago. This is why the music box stays in storage. This is why we have rules." "An echo of what? Who was that little girl?" Mrs. Holloway looked down at the box in her hands. "Her name was Catherine Merrow. She died in 1892 at the age of 7. This music box belonged to her mother, who gave it to Catherine as a birthday gift. 3 days later, Catherine drowned in Hollow Creek while playing near the water. Her mother, consumed by grief, could not bear to keep the box but could not bear to destroy it either. It has been here ever since, and Catherine's echo has been tied to it, trying to recreate the dance her mother promised to teach her. A dance she never got to learn." I stared at the box, at the beautiful silver inlay of roses and ivy, and felt sick. Why keep it? Why not destroy it, release her? "Because I do not know if destruction would release her or trap her more completely," Mrs. Holloway said. "The box is a tether, but it is also a boundary. As long as it stays closed, stays in storage, Catherine's echo remains dormant. She cannot hurt anyone, but if the box is opened, if the music plays, she manifests. And she is desperate, Harper. Desperate to have what she was denied. She will try to take anyone who responds to her into the place where she exists, a place between life and death. No one who goes there returns. Then why not throw it away? Take it somewhere else?" "Because this shop is where it belongs," Mrs. Holloway said. "This place holds many such objects, many such echoes. They are contained here, kept in balance. If we remove them, scatter them, there is no telling what might happen. This building is a repository, a place where the forgotten and the forsaken come to rest. My family has maintained it for 4 generations. It is our responsibility." She moved past me toward the stairs. "Go home, Harper. I will secure the box properly. And from now on, if you see an item in a place it should not be, do not touch it. Come find me immediately." I wanted to argue, to demand more answers, but exhaustion hit me like a wave. I nodded and grabbed my jacket, eager to escape into the cool night air. As I reached the door, Mrs. Holloway called out one more time. "Harper, you did well tonight." "You did not touch her. You did not accept her invitation. That took strength. Perhaps you are meant to work here after all." I did not know how to respond to that, so I just left. That night, I did not sleep. I sat in my small room, lights on, trying to process what I had seen. The rational part of my brain wanted to dismiss it as exhaustion, as stress-induced hallucination, but I had seen her. I had heard that voice. I had watched a solid physical little girl vanish into nothing when the music stopped. The shop was not just haunted, it was a prison. A carefully maintained collection of trapped souls and dangerous memories, all kept in balance by a system of rules I was only beginning to understand. And I was working there. 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, surrounded by objects that held horrors I could barely imagine. The smart thing would have been to quit, to walk away and never look back, but I did not. After the incident with the music box, I expected Mrs. Holloway to add more warnings, more rules, more cryptic explanations. Instead, she said nothing. She simply moved the music box back to the attic and we returned to our regular routine, as if nothing had happened. But something had changed. I felt it in the way the shop seemed to watch me now, in the way shadows moved in my peripheral vision, in the way certain objects seemed to radiate cold when I passed them. The shop knew I had seen something. The shop knew I understood, at least partially, what it really was. October arrived with crisp air and the smell of dying leaves. Hollow Creek transformed into a postcard of autumn. Orange and red foliage, pumpkins on doorsteps, the distant smoke of wood fires. The shop remained unchanged, existing in its own perpetual gloom regardless of the season outside. It was a Wednesday morning, 3 weeks after the music box incident, when I found the key. I was opening up, going through my usual routine of turning on lights and checking that everything was in order after the night. That was when I noticed something on the counter that had not been there when I left the previous evening. A key. It was old, made of tarnished brass with an ornate bow shaped like a crow with spread wings. The shaft was long and the bit complex, the kind of key that opened old warded locks. I picked it up, feeling the weight of it in my palm. It was ice cold, so cold it almost burned to touch. Rule 2. If you find a key that does not belong to any lock in the shop, throw it into the fireplace immediately. I looked at the key, then at the fireplace across the showroom. It was a large stone fireplace, probably original to the building, though I had never seen it used. Mrs. Holloway had mentioned keeping kindling and matches in a brass bucket beside it in case I ever needed to follow the second rule. But curiosity gnawed at me. Why would a key appear on the counter overnight? Where did it come from? And more importantly, what did it open? I walked to the back of the shop, key in hand, telling myself I would just look around before deciding what to do. The cold from the key seemed to spread up my arm, making my fingers ache. There were dozens of locked cabinets, wardrobes, and boxes throughout the shop. Surely this key went to something. I tried it in a locked cabinet on the first floor. It did not fit. I tried it in an old steamer trunk. Wrong size. I moved to the second floor, trying locked drawers in various desks and dressers. Nothing. That was when I heard the humming again. It came from above, from the attic. The same thin melody I had heard before. But this time it sounded almost beckoning, almost inviting. The key in my hand grew even colder, so cold that frost began to form on my palm. I looked down at the key and noticed something I had not seen before. Engraved on the shaft in letters so small I had to squint to read them was a single word: attic. My blood ran cold. This key opened something in the attic, the place I was forbidden to go. The place where the strongest presences congregated, where the veil was thinnest. Rule 2 existed for a reason. This key was not meant to be used. It was meant to be destroyed. I turned and walked quickly back downstairs, heading for the fireplace. The humming from above grew louder, more insistent, as if whatever was up there knew what I intended to do and was trying to stop me. The brass bucket beside the fireplace contained kindling and old newspaper. I grabbed the box of matches from the mantel and began building a small fire, my hands shaking. The key sat on the stone hearth next to me, frost spreading across its surface like a living thing. The fire caught, flames licking at the dry wood. I picked up the key, feeling the burning cold of it, and prepared to throw it into the flames. "Stop," the voice came from behind me. I spun around, expecting to see Mrs. Holloway, but there was no one there. The showroom was empty. But I had heard the voice clearly, a man's voice, rough and urgent. "Do not destroy the key." I looked around wildly, trying to find the source. The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, reverberating through the shop. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely steady. "Someone who needs your help," the voice said. "That key is the only way to free us. The only way to end this. Please do not destroy it." "Free who?" I demanded. "Free what?" "Those of us trapped here," the voice said. And now I could hear the desperation in it, the pain. "Holloway keeps us locked away, keeps us bound to objects and rooms, keeps us from moving on. That key opens the door to the attic. In the attic is a mirror. Break the mirror and we can finally rest." Please, I have been here for 70 years, please. My hand holding the key above the fire trembled. 70 years. If what the voice said was true, there were souls trapped here, suffering, unable to move on because Mrs. Holloway kept them contained. But the rules existed for a reason. Mrs. Holloway had said the shop maintained balance, that scattering or releasing these presences could cause unknown consequences. Why should I trust you? I asked. Because you have seen the little girl, the voice said. Catherine. She is trapped in that music box, reliving her death over and over, desperate for the dance she never got to have. Would you condemn her to that for eternity? Would you condemn all of us? I thought of Catherine, of her black eyes and two sharp teeth, of the desperation in that layered voice. She had not seemed like a soul-seeking rest. She had seemed like something hungry, something that would drag me into darkness given the chance. Mrs. Holloway said, releasing you could make things worse. I said. Holloway is afraid, the voice replied. Afraid of change, afraid of letting go, afraid of what might happen if she is not in control. But we deserve peace, Harper. Do not we deserve that? I stood there frozen, the key in one hand and my doubt in the other. The fire crackled at my feet, waiting. The voice was silent now, letting me make my choice. Then I remembered something Mrs. Holloway had said. No one who goes there returns. She had not been talking about Catherine specifically. She had been talking about the place where these presences existed. And if this voice was truly trying to help, why would it need me to go to the attic? Why not tell me how to help from here? You want me to go up there, I said slowly. You want me to use the key to open something in the attic and break a mirror. But you cannot tell me to do that directly because then I would not go. So you are appealing to my sympathy, making me think I am helping trapped souls find peace. The silence that followed confirmed my suspicion. What really happens if I go up there? I asked. What are you? The voice, when it came again, was different, colder, harder. You should have thrown the key in the fire when you had the chance, Harper. I did not hesitate. I threw the key into the flames. The reaction was immediate and violent. Every object in the shop began to shake. Books flew from shelves. Dishes shattered. The windows rattled in their frames. A roar of rage filled the air, so loud I had to cover my ears. The key in the fire began to glow red, then white hot. The brass melted, running like liquid, and as it did, the roaring faded. The shaking stopped. Objects crashed to the floor and lay still. In the sudden silence, I heard the front door open. Mrs. Holloway stood in the doorway, taking in the destruction with a single sweeping glance. She looked at the fireplace, at the melted remains of the key, and then at me. You followed the rule, she said, something like relief in her voice. Something tried to stop me, I said, my legs shaking. A voice. It tried to convince me to use the key instead. Mrs. Holloway nodded, moving into the shop and beginning to right overturned chairs. The mirror entity. It has been trying to escape for decades. Every few years it manages to manifest a key. Usually I find and destroy it before anyone else does. I should have checked last night. I am sorry you had to deal with that. What is it? I asked, helping her pick up fallen books. Something old, she said. Something that should have passed on centuries ago but instead learned how to feed on the energy of other trapped spirits. It wants freedom so it can consume more. The mirror in the attic is its anchor point. As long as the mirror remains intact and locked away, it is contained. If someone were to break it, the entity would be released. It would not just escape the shop, Harper. It would tear through Hollow Creek like a plague, consuming every lost soul, every ghost, every remnant of life it could find. And when there was nothing left here, it would move on to the next town. And the next? I sat down heavily on a nearby chair, the adrenaline draining from my body and leaving me exhausted. How do you know all this? Because my grandmother faced it, Mrs. Holloway said quietly. In 1943, someone used a key just like the one you destroyed. They opened the attic door and went inside. They broke the mirror. My grandmother barely managed to contain it again, but not before it killed 17 people in this town. 17 souls it consumed, leaving nothing behind but empty husks. My grandmother spent the rest of her life learning how to strengthen the barriers, how to keep it locked away. She taught my mother. My mother taught me, and someday, if I can find the right person, I will pass this knowledge on. She looked at me intently. You followed the rule even when something you thought was a suffering soul begged you not to. That takes strength and discernment. Those are rare qualities, Harper. I did not know what to say to that. We worked in silence for the next hour, cleaning up the destruction, organizing the fallen items back onto shelves. Some things were broken beyond repair, and Mrs. Holloway set those aside without comment. When the shop looked reasonably normal again, she made tea in a back room I had never entered before. It was a small space with a table, 2 chairs, and walls lined with books, journals by the look of them, each one labeled with dates going back over a century. "These are the records," Mrs. Holloway said, handing me a cup of strong black tea. "Every item that has come through the shop, every manifestation, every incident. My great-great-grandfather started keeping them in 1890. They have saved lives more than once." I sipped the tea, feeling warmth spread through my body for the first time since I had found the key. "Why do you stay?" I asked. "Why not just close the shop, walk away?" "Because someone has to do this work," she said simply. "These objects exist. These presences exist. If they are not properly contained, if they are scattered or destroyed without understanding, the consequences could be catastrophic. This shop is a sanctuary of sorts, a place where dangerous things can rest without harming the living. It is not a pleasant responsibility, but it is a necessary one." "And you want me to learn?" I said, understanding now why she had been watching me so carefully, why she had let me experience these incidents rather than sheltering me from them. "If you are willing," she said. "You have proven yourself capable. You followed the rules even when it was difficult. You showed judgment and courage. Those are the qualities needed to maintain this place. I'm not getting any younger, Harper. Eventually someone will need to take over." I thought about it as I finished my tea. A week ago I would have refused outright. But something had changed in me. I had seen the reality of what existed beyond the ordinary world. I had faced genuine supernatural danger and survived. And more than that, I understood the importance of what Mrs. Holloway did. Without her, without this shop, things like the mirror entity would be free to harm people. "I will stay," I said. "I will learn, but I need to understand more. I need to know what I am dealing with." Mrs. Holloway smiled, a rare, genuine smile that made her look decades younger. "Then your real education begins tomorrow." True to her word, Mrs. Holloway began teaching me the next day. Not through lectures or textbooks, but through direct experience and the careful study of the journals that lined her back room. Each morning before the shop opened, I would spend an hour reading entries from previous decades. I learned about the Victorian mourning jewelry that held the grief of widows so strongly that anyone who wore it would be overcome with suicidal thoughts. I learned about the grandfather clock that stopped at the exact moment someone in the building was about to die, giving a warning that could not be ignored. I learned about the painting of a ship at sea that would sometimes show different weather, and when it showed a storm, someone in Hollow Creek would drown within 3 days. The shop, I came to understand, was not just a collection of haunted objects. It was a carefully curated archive of human suffering. Each item a nexus point where emotion and trauma had become so concentrated that it created a lasting imprint on the physical world. Not all hauntings are spirits. Mrs. Holloway explained one morning as we examined a child's rocking horse that moved on its own during thunderstorms. Some are simply echoes, recordings of intense emotion that play back under certain conditions. The rocking horse is one such item. A boy named Thomas died of scarlet fever while sitting on this horse, calling for his mother during a thunderstorm. The emotion of that moment was so powerful that it impressed itself onto the object. During storms, the memory plays back. The horse rocks. But there is no conscious entity, no ghost, just an echo. "How do you tell the difference?" I asked. "Echoes are predictable," she said. "They follow patterns, repeat the same actions under the same conditions. True spirits are conscious. They can communicate, make choices, interact with the present rather than just replaying the past. And then there are things like the mirror entity. Neither true spirits nor simple echoes, but something else entirely. Something that has learned to persist and grow." I absorbed this information like a student in a macabre university, taking notes, asking questions, slowly building an understanding of the rules that govern this strange world. But theory was one thing. Real experience was another. It was late October, just days before Halloween, when Mrs. Holloway brought me to the second floor and showed me a locked cabinet I had noticed before but never examined closely. It was made of dark wood with glass doors, and inside sat a collection of porcelain dolls, each one more unsettling than the last. These came from various estates over the years, Mrs. Holloway said, producing a key from the ring she always wore on her belt. Most are harmless, just old toys people find disturbing because of their age and appearance. But one of them is different. One of them is dangerous. She unlocked the cabinet and gestured for me to look closer. There were 7 dolls in total, arranged on 3 shelves. They ranged in size from small baby dolls to larger child-sized figures. All had the painted faces and glass eyes typical of early 20th century dolls. "Which one?" I asked. "That is what you need to determine," Mrs. Holloway said. "This is part of your education. You have read the journals. You have learned the signs. Now you must apply that knowledge." I studied the dolls carefully, looking for anything that might indicate which one was the dangerous item. They all looked old, all slightly eerie in the way antique dolls always are. But one on the middle shelf caught my attention. She was medium-sized, maybe 18 inches tall, with dark curly hair and a white dress. Her eyes were blue glass, and unlike the other dolls, she seemed to be staring directly at me regardless of the angle I viewed her from. "That one," I said, pointing. "Why?" Mrs. Holloway asked. "The eyes," I said. "They track movement. And the air around her feels colder than the rest of the cabinet." Mrs. Holloway nodded approvingly. "Her name is Isabel. She was made in 1922 as a gift for a girl named Margaret Sutton. Margaret died of diphtheria 6 months after receiving the doll. Her mother, unable to cope with the grief, convinced herself that Margaret's spirit had gone into the doll. She talked to it, dressed it, treated it as if her daughter were still alive. When the mother died 15 years later, the doll was donated here. And something did go into that doll, Harper. Though whether it is truly Margaret's spirit or something that merely pretends to be is unclear." "What does she do?" I asked, unable to take my eyes off the doll. "She moves," Mrs. Holloway said. "Not often and never when directly observed. But if you leave her in one position and return later, she will have moved. Sometimes just her head turning to face a different direction. Sometimes her whole position, standing when she was sitting, sitting when she was standing. And occasionally, people report hearing a child's voice coming from wherever she is kept, asking for her mother." A chill ran down my spine. "Why keep her? Why not destroy the doll?" "Because we do not know what would happen," Mrs. Holloway said. "If Margaret's spirit truly is bound to this doll, destroying it might release her to move on. Or it might trap her more completely, causing her consciousness to fragment and scatter in ways we cannot predict. The safer option is containment. We keep Isabel locked in this cabinet, check on her regularly, and ensure she does not fall into the hands of someone who might try to exploit or harm what remains of the child within her." She closed and locked the cabinet. "You will be responsible for checking on Isabel twice a week, Monday and Thursday mornings before the shop opens. You will document her position, any changes, any anomalies. Can you do that?" I nodded, though the thought of being responsible for monitoring a haunted doll made my stomach clench with anxiety. "Good," Mrs. Holloway said. "Consider this your first official duty as apprentice curator." The title startled me. Apprentice curator. When had I gone from employee to apprentice? But I did not question it. Some part of me recognized that I had already made the choice to fully commit to this strange work. My first Monday morning check went smoothly. I unlocked the cabinet, documented that Isabel was sitting upright with her hands in her lap and her head turned slightly to the left, and locked the cabinet again. Nothing unusual, nothing frightening. Thursday morning was different. I arrived at 7:30, well before opening time, and climbed to the second floor with my documentation notebook. The morning light was weak, filtered through the dusty windows, creating long shadows among the furniture. I approached the cabinet and immediately noticed something wrong. The glass door was open. Just slightly, maybe an inch, but definitely open. I had locked it on Monday. I was certain of that. My heart hammering, I pulled the door fully open and looked inside. Isabel had moved. On Monday, she had been sitting on the middle shelf. Now she was standing on the top shelf, her face pressed against the glass as if she had been trying to look out. I documented this with shaking hands, noting the position change and the open door. As I was about to close and lock the cabinet, I heard it. "Mama?" The voice was tiny, plaintive, coming from the doll, a child's voice filled with longing and confusion. "Mama, where are you? It is so dark. I cannot find you." I froze, staring at Isabel. Her mouth did not move. Her glass eyes remained fixed and empty, but the voice continued, growing more distressed. "Mama, I am scared. Please come find me. It is so dark and cold. I have been waiting so long." Something in my chest clenched with sympathy. If this truly was Margaret, if some part of that 7-year-old girl who died nearly a century ago was trapped in this doll, how much suffering had she endured? How many decades of confusion and fear? I reached out, my hand moving toward the doll almost without conscious thought. Maybe I could comfort her. Maybe I could let her know she was not alone. "Harper, stop." Mrs. Holloway's voice cracked through the air like a whip. I jerked my hand back, stumbling away from the cabinet. Mrs. Holloway was at the top of the stairs, breathing hard as if she had run up them. "Do not touch her," Mrs. Holloway said, moving quickly to the cabinet. "Do not respond to her. Do not engage, but she is scared," I said. "She is asking for her mother." "If we could just—" "That is not Margaret," Mrs. Holloway said firmly. She closed the cabinet door and locked it with swift, practiced movements. "Not anymore, if it ever was. What is in that doll has had 100 years to change, to become something other than the child it might have started as. It mimics grief and fear to evoke sympathy, to get people to touch the doll, to form a connection. Once that connection is made, it can exert influence. Nightmares, obsession, eventually possession." She pulled me away from the cabinet, back toward the stairs. "This is a crucial lesson, Harper. The supernatural often weaponizes our empathy. It uses our best instincts, our desire to help, to comfort, to heal against us. You must learn to distinguish between genuine pleas for help and manipulation. You must develop the ability to maintain boundaries even when every fiber of your being wants to reach out." I felt sick. "So there is nothing we can do for her? For whatever is in that doll?" "We keep her contained," Mrs. Holloway said. "We ensure she harms no one. That is the help we can offer. It may not seem like enough, but it is what we have." We went downstairs in silence. I spent the rest of the day thinking about Margaret, about the voice calling for a mother who had been dead for decades, about the fine line between compassion and vulnerability when dealing with the supernatural. That evening, as I was preparing to close up, a woman came in. She was perhaps in her 60s, well-dressed, with an air of confidence that marked her as someone used to getting what she wanted. "I am looking for a very specific item," she said. "A porcelain doll. Dark hair, white dress, about 18 inches tall. I have reason to believe you have it here." Every alarm bell in my mind started ringing. "I am sorry, but I would need to check with the owner about specific items." "May I ask why you are looking for this particular doll?" "It belonged to my grandmother," the woman said. "Margaret Sutton. I have been researching my family history and learned that my great-grandmother donated a doll that had been Margaret's to this shop after she died. I would like to purchase it to keep it in the family." I kept my expression neutral. "I see. Let me speak with Mrs. Holloway. She handles all inquiries about items with provenance. May I have your name and contact information?" The woman hesitated, then gave me a name, Eleanor Sutton, and a phone number. I wrote it down, promised to have Mrs. Holloway contact her, and watched as she left the shop, her expression dissatisfied. The moment she was gone, I went to the back room where Mrs. Holloway was working on ledgers. "Someone just came in asking about Isabel," I said, and explained the interaction. Mrs. Holloway's expression grew grave. "Did she touch anything? Go near the second floor?" "No, she stayed by the front counter the whole time." "Good." Mrs. Holloway stood, moving to a filing cabinet and pulling out a folder. She flipped through documents until she found what she was looking for. "Eleanor Sutton has tried to acquire Isabel 3 times over the past 20 years. She claims to be Margaret's great-granddaughter, but our research suggests otherwise. We believe she is a collector who specializes in haunted objects and wants Isabel for her personal collection, or worse, to exploit commercially." "Can she force you to sell it?" I asked. "No," Mrs. Holloway said. "The doll was legally donated. We have no obligation to return it to anyone. But Eleanor is persistent. She will likely return, perhaps with a lawyer or making threats. You did well not to confirm we have the item." That night, as I walked home through Hollow Creek's darkening streets, I felt the weight of responsibility settling more heavily on my shoulders. This was not just about following rules to stay safe. It was about protecting dangerous objects from falling into the wrong hands, about maintaining a barrier between the supernatural and the unprepared. I was becoming something I had never intended to be: a guardian of secrets, a keeper of dangerous things, a curator of the cursed and forgotten. and the strangest part was that I did not want to leave. Despite the fear, despite the danger, I felt a sense of purpose I had never experienced before. This work mattered. What Mrs. Holloway and I did here mattered. As I reached my door, I looked back toward Maple Street, where the shop stood in shadow, its windows dark. Somewhere inside, Isabel stood in her locked cabinet. The music box with Catherine's echo sat in the attic storage. The mirror entity waited behind its locked door, always searching for another key to manifest, and I would return tomorrow to watch over them all. The shop changed as Halloween approached. I do not mean in any decorative sense. Mrs. Holloway would never stoop to seasonal displays, but in atmosphere. The air grew heavier, harder to breathe. Shadows lingered longer in corners even after I turned on all the lights. Objects that had been dormant for months suddenly exhibited activity. A music box that was not Catherine's began playing on its own. Photographs in gilded frames showed faces that were not there before. The grandfather clock I had been warned about stopped and started at odd times, though fortunately never at the precise moment Mrs. Holloway had indicated would signal death. The veil thins, Mrs. Holloway explained when I asked about the increased activity. Between Halloween and the first week of November, the boundary between the living world and whatever exists beyond becomes more permeable. Spirits find it easier to manifest. Echoes replay more frequently and with greater intensity. It is the most dangerous time to work here, but also the most important. We must be vigilant. She increased my hours, having me work several evening shifts that week. On the Tuesday before Halloween, she asked me to stay until midnight for the first time. I need to document the midnight transition, she explained. The journals indicate that certain objects exhibit unique behavior precisely at midnight during this period. I want you to observe while I record our findings. I remembered Rule 4. Do not speak to anyone in the shop after midnight if you are alone. You will be here with me? I asked. Until 12:15, she said. I have another commitment I cannot miss. But you will be fine for 15 minutes alone. Just remember the rule. I was not thrilled about this plan, but I had committed to this apprenticeship. If staying past midnight was part of my education, so be it. The evening shift passed slowly. A few customers came and went, the usual odd browsers and collectors who frequented the shop. By 9 o'clock, the streets outside were empty, and Mrs. Holloway locked the front door, turning the sign to closed. We have 3 hours, she said. Let me show you what to watch for. We toured the shop with notebooks documenting the position of specific items she had marked for observation. A jewelry box on the first floor, a taxidermied crow on the second floor, a ship in a bottle that sometimes showed rough seas. Every 15 minutes we would return to each item and note any changes. At first, nothing happened, but as we approached 11 o'clock, I began to notice subtle differences. The jewelry box, which had been closed, was now open. The crow had turned to face a different direction. The ship in the bottle showed darker water, the tiny waves higher. It is beginning, Mrs. Holloway murmured, writing quickly in her notebook. The transition period starts roughly an hour before midnight. Activity will increase until exactly 12 o'clock, then drop off sharply. We need to be ready. By 11:30, the activity was impossible to ignore. Objects rattled on shelves. The temperature dropped noticeably. I could see my breath fogging in the air despite the relatively mild October night outside. The sounds of the building, always present but usually ignorable, grew louder. Creaking floorboards, groaning pipes, the whisper of air through cracks, and footsteps from the attic. They were constant now, pacing back and forth with an urgency I had not heard before. Mrs. Holloway noted this without comment, but I saw the tension in her shoulders. At 11:45, something new happened. The mirrors throughout the shop, and there were dozens of them, from small hand mirrors to large standing pieces, began to fog over, as if someone were breathing on them from the other side. Do not look directly into any mirror, Mrs. Holloway said sharply. The mirror entity is active tonight. It will try to make eye contact. If it does, it can create a connection. I carefully averted my eyes from the mirrors as we moved through the shop, focusing on Mrs. Holloway's back instead. At 11:50, she led me to the back room where she kept her journals and made tea. We will wait here, she said. We are not observing the midnight moment itself. That is too dangerous. We document the before and after, but the actual transition is something to avoid if possible. Why? I asked. Because at the stroke of midnight during this period, every presence in the shop is fully manifested, she said. Every echo, every spirit, every entity. The shop becomes, for that brief moment, a crossroads between worlds. Looking into that without proper protection and preparation can damage the mind. I have done it twice in my life, both times with extensive precautions. I do not recommend it for anyone. We sat in the back room as the old clock on the wall ticked toward midnight. Mrs. Holloway poured tea with steady hands, but I noticed she did not drink any. She was listening, every sense focused on the shop around us. At 11:59, the shop went completely silent. The creaking stopped. The footsteps stopped. Even the ambient sounds of the building settling ceased. It was as if the entire structure held its breath. Then the clock struck midnight. I cannot adequately describe what happened in that moment. Sound came from everywhere. Voices, music, crying, laughing, screaming, all layered on top of each other in a cacophony that should have been deafening but somehow was not. I could hear individual voices if I focused. A woman singing a lullaby. A man shouting orders in a language I did not recognize. Children playing. Someone weeping inconsolably. The temperature plummeted. Frost spread across the walls of the back room in intricate patterns. The lights flickered but did not go out completely, and I felt them. Every presence in the shop, pressing against the boundaries of the physical world. Not threatening, not approaching, just there, existing, aware. It lasted exactly 1 minute. Then, as the clock finished its 12 chimes, the sounds ceased. The temperature rose back to normal. The frost vanished as if it had never been. The shop was once again just a shop, quiet and still. Mrs. Holloway let out a breath. That was a strong one, she said. The veil is particularly thin this year. I realized my hands were shaking. I clasped them together, trying to process what I had just experienced. You did well, Mrs. Holloway said. Many people panic when they hear the midnight transition for the first time. You stayed calm. What happens if someone is in the main shop during that moment? I asked. It depends on the person, she said. Some people see nothing unusual at all. They lack the sensitivity to perceive what is happening. Others see everything. They can observe all the presences simultaneously, which is overwhelming. Some go mad. Some become obsessed, spending their lives trying to experience that moment again. A very few learn to understand what they are seeing and use that knowledge constructively. She stood, gathering her coat. I must leave now. You will remain here for 15 minutes, then you may go home. Remember Rule 4. Do not speak to anyone in the shop after midnight if you are alone. Even if someone appears to be a customer, even if they seem perfectly normal, do not speak to them. Do you understand? Yes, I said, though the thought of staying alone after what I had just experienced terrified me. You will be fine, Mrs. Holloway said, as if reading my thoughts. Just follow the rule. I will see you tomorrow. She left through the back door, and I heard her footsteps fade into the night. I sat in the back room, checking my watch obsessively. 12:05, 12:07, 12:10, only 5 more minutes. I could do this. That was when I heard the front doorbell chime. My blood turned to ice. The front door was locked. Mrs. Holloway had locked it hours ago. No one should be able to enter, but someone had. I heard footsteps in the main showroom, slow and measured. Then a voice called out, "Hello? Is anyone here? I'm sorry to come so late, but I saw lights on and I really need help." It was a woman's voice, middle-aged, with a note of genuine distress. Every instinct I had screamed at me to go out there to see who it was, to help if someone truly needed assistance. But Mrs. Holloway's words echoed in my mind. Do not speak to anyone in the shop after midnight if you are alone, even if they seem perfectly normal. I pressed my hand over my mouth to prevent myself from calling out and remained absolutely silent in the back room. The footsteps moved through the shop, coming closer to the back room door. Hello? Please, if anyone is here, I really need to speak with someone. It is about an item I purchased from this shop years ago. It is very important. The doorknob to the back room began to turn. I held my breath, pressing myself against the far wall. The door was not locked. If whoever or whatever was out there wanted to come in, nothing would stop them. The knob turned slowly, almost tentatively. Then it stopped. The footsteps retreated, moving back toward the front of the shop. Please, the voice called again, and now there was something different in its tone. something less human. "I know you are here. I can feel you. Just say something. Just one word. That is all I need, one word." That was all it would take to break the rule. To create some kind of connection with whatever was out there pretending to be human. I remained silent, my heart hammering so loudly I was certain the thing could hear it. The footsteps continued moving through the shop for another few minutes. I heard objects being moved, examined, set down. Then finally the front doorbell chimed again and the sounds ceased. I waited, counting down the seconds. At exactly 12:15 I bolted from the back room, through the shop and out the front door without looking back. I did not stop running until I reached my apartment, where I locked the door and pushed a chair against it for good measure. I did not sleep that night. The next morning, I arrived at the shop exhausted and shaken. Mrs. Holloway took one look at me and nodded knowingly. "You followed the rule," she said. It was not a question. "Something came in after you left," I said, a woman's voice. She tried to get me to speak to her. "Not a woman," Mrs. Holloway corrected. "The mirror entity. It can create manifestations, project voices appear as human. After midnight, when the veil is thinnest, it has enough power to create very convincing illusions. If you had spoken to it, if you had acknowledged its presence, you would have given it a foothold in your consciousness. It could have followed you home, haunted your dreams, eventually driven you back here to break its mirror." She made tea, and we sat in the back room while she explained more about the mirror entity and the other dangerous presences in the shop. "Not everything here is malevolent," she said. "Many of the spirits and echoes are simply sad, confused, or trapped by their own inability to let go of the living world. But a few are genuinely dangerous. The mirror entity is the most dangerous because it is intelligent and patient. It has spent decades learning, growing, finding new ways to manipulate people. Why not destroy the mirror and deal with the consequences?" I asked. "At least then it would not be an ongoing threat." "Because the consequences are too severe," she said. "My grandmother barely contained it when the mirror was broken before. 17 people died. If it were released now in our current world with our technology and interconnectedness, there is no telling how far it could spread or how many lives it could consume. The safest option is eternal containment." I sipped my tea, processing this. "So we are basically running a supernatural prison." "In a sense," Mrs. Holloway agreed, "though I prefer to think of it as a sanctuary. These objects and presences exist. They cannot simply be wished away. Someone must take responsibility for them, must keep them from harming the innocent. That is what my family has done for 4 generations. That is what I am asking you to help me continue." Over the next few days, Mrs. Holloway revealed more about the shop's true nature and her family's history. The Holloways had been collectors and dealers in antiques since the mid-1800s, but her great-great-grandfather had discovered that certain items attracted supernatural activity. Rather than being frightened away, he became fascinated. He began deliberately seeking out haunted objects, studying them, learning the patterns and rules that governed their behavior. By the time his son took over the business, the shop had become a known repository for such items. People donated haunted heirlooms they did not want, but could not bring themselves to destroy. Collectors sold pieces that were too dangerous to keep. The shop became a clearinghouse for the cursed and possessed. But it is not just about containment, Mrs. Holloway explained. Some items need to find their proper owners. Remember Rule 3? If an item falls from a shelf, it must be sold to the next customer who enters. That is because the shop itself has a form of intelligence, a collective consciousness formed by all the presences contained here. It knows which objects need to move on and which people need those objects. What do you mean, need them? I asked. She pulled out the ledger and flipped to a recent entry. 3 weeks ago, a woman came in and purchased a locket. It had fallen from a shelf the moment she entered the shop. I sold it to her as Rule 3 requires. 2 days later, she returned to thank me. She said the locket contained a photograph of her grandmother, who had died when the woman was young. She had no pictures of her grandmother, and had always regretted it. Somehow, impossibly, this locket from a completely different family contained an image of her grandmother. The shop knew. It connected the object with the person who needed it. That is impossible, I said. And yet it happened, Mrs. Holloway replied. The shop operates on rules that do not always make logical sense. But they work. Trust in that and you will be safe. As Halloween approached, I noticed something else, Certain customers began appearing more frequently, people who gave off the same strange energy as the objects in the shop. They moved differently, spoke differently, looked at things with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. Sensitives, Mrs. Holloway explained when I mentioned this, people who can perceive supernatural energy. They are drawn to this place, especially during the thinning period. Some are harmless collectors, others are dangerous. You must learn to distinguish between them. She taught me to observe body language, to note how people interacted with objects, to watch their eyes. True collectors respect what they are handling, she said. They understand the danger and treat items with appropriate caution. Exploiters see only potential profit or power. They will pressure you, try to manipulate you, promise anything to get their hands on the most dangerous pieces. Eleanor Sutton returned twice more that week, each time with new stories about why she deserved to have Isabel. First, she claimed it was for a museum dedicated to her family's history. Then she said she wanted to give the doll a proper burial to release Margaret's spirit. Mrs. Holloway refused each time, politely but firmly, and eventually Eleanor stopped coming. But I saw her across the street one evening as I was closing up, standing in the shadows watching the shop. The look on her face was not one of disappointment or frustration. It was calculation. She had not given up. She was planning something. On Halloween night, Mrs. Holloway closed the shop at 6 o'clock and told me to go home. Tonight is the strongest point of the thinning, she said. I will remain here to ensure everything stays properly contained. This is not a night for apprentices, no matter how promising. I wanted to argue to prove I could handle it, but the expression on her face stopped me. For the first time since I had met her, Mrs. Holloway looked worried. That more than anything convinced me to leave without protest. I went home, but I could not settle. I kept thinking about the shop, about Mrs. Holloway alone there on the most dangerous night of the year. What if something went wrong? What if she needed help? At 11 o'clock, unable to stand the anxiety any longer, I walked back to Maple Street. The town was quiet. Most people were inside, either celebrating with family or avoiding the streets on a night that felt charged with possibility and danger. The shop looked dark from the outside, but as I approached, I saw a faint light in one of the upper windows. Mrs. Holloway was on the second floor. I was about to knock on the door when I noticed something wrong. The front door was slightly ajar. Mrs. Holloway would never leave the door open, especially tonight. I pushed it wider and stepped inside, my heart racing. The showroom was dark, but moonlight filtered through the grimy windows, casting everything in shades of gray. I could hear sounds from upstairs, footsteps and voices. Multiple voices. I moved toward the stairs as quietly as possible and began to climb. The sounds grew clearer. Mrs. Holloway was speaking, her voice sharp with anger, and another voice responded. Eleanor Sutton. I reached the second-floor landing and peered around the corner. Mrs. Holloway stood in front of the locked cabinet that held Isabel. Her arms spread wide as if physically blocking access. Eleanor Sutton faced her, and she was not alone. Two men flanked her, large and intimidating. This is private property, Mrs. Holloway said. You are trespassing. Leave now or I will call the police. Call them, Eleanor said calmly. By the time they arrive, I will have what I came for and be long gone. You are an old woman, Mrs. Holloway. You cannot stop all three of us. You have no idea what you are trying to take, Mrs. Holloway said. That doll is not a collectible or a curiosity. It is dangerous. It will hurt you. I will take that risk, Eleanor replied. She nodded to the two men. Get the cabinet open. The men moved forward and Mrs. Holloway tried to block them, but they were too strong. One of them shoved her aside, not violently, but firmly enough that she stumbled and fell. I did not think. I just reacted. I ran forward, positioning myself between Mrs. Holloway and the men. Stop, I shouted. You need to leave now. Eleanor looked at me with cold amusement. The assistant. How noble. Stand aside, girl. This does not concern you. Everything in this shop concerns me, I said, helping Mrs. Holloway to her feet. And you are about to make a terrible mistake. One of the men produced a crowbar and moved toward the cabinet. Before he could reach it, something happened that stopped everyone in their tracks. Every doll in the cabinet turned its head simultaneously to stare at Eleanor and her companions. Not just Isabel. All 7 dolls, their glass eyes suddenly reflecting light that was not there, their porcelain faces somehow expressing rage. Then Isabel spoke. Not in the plaintive child's voice I had heard before, but in something ancient and furious. "You want to take me from my home? You want to use me for profit? Then come, take me. See what happens." The temperature plummeted. Frost spread across every surface. The two men stumbled backward, their bravado evaporating into pure terror. But Eleanor stood her ground, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and greed. "I am not afraid of you," she said to the doll. "You should be," Mrs. Holloway said quietly, "because I can no longer protect you from what you are about to unleash." Eleanor lunged for the cabinet. Her hands closed around Isabel, pulling the doll free. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Eleanor began to scream. Her companions ran, their footsteps thundering down the stairs and out into the night. But Eleanor could not run. She stood frozen, holding Isabel, her body rigid as if locked in place. Images flickered around her. Ghostly scenes of a child drowning, a mother weeping. Decades of loneliness and rage concentrated into pure psychic assault. Mrs. Holloway moved forward and carefully pried the doll from Eleanor's hands. The moment the connection broke, Eleanor collapsed, unconscious but breathing. "Call an ambulance," Mrs. Holloway said to me. "Tell them a woman broke in and had some kind of seizure." "Nothing more." I made the call while Mrs. Holloway secured Isabel back in the cabinet. By the time the paramedics arrived, Eleanor was semi-conscious and babbling incoherently about dolls and ghosts and darkness. They took her away and the police took our statements about the break-in. No charges were ever filed. Eleanor never returned to Hollow Creek. It has been 6 months since Halloween. 6 months since I truly understood the weight of what Mrs. Holloway does here, what she has asked me to learn and eventually take over. The shop continues its work. Items arrive, items leave. The rules remain constant. I check on Isabel twice a week, document the grandfather clock, avoid the attic stairs when I hear footsteps, and throw any mysterious keys directly into the fireplace without hesitation. I have learned to distinguish between echoes and true spirits, between harmless curiosities and genuinely dangerous objects. I have read through decades of journals, absorbing the accumulated knowledge of 4 generations of Holloways, and I have begun to understand that this place, strange and frightening as it is, serves a vital purpose. Mrs. Holloway is training me not just to follow rules, but to understand why they exist, to recognize patterns, to make judgment calls when situations arise that no rulebook can predict. She is preparing me to eventually run this shop alone. Some nights, I still wake up thinking about Catherine in her music box, about the mirror entity waiting for another chance, about all the suffering and trauma contained within these walls. I wonder if I am strong enough for this responsibility, if I am wise enough, if I will make mistakes that cost lives. But then I remember the woman who found her grandmother's picture in that locket. I remember the objects that have passed through here and been safely contained rather than causing harm in the world. I remember that someone must do this work and Mrs. Holloway chose me. Why me? I still do not fully know. Mrs. Holloway says I have the right combination of curiosity and caution, empathy and boundaries. She says I can see the supernatural world without being consumed by it. She believes I am meant for this, and maybe she is right. The shop on Maple Street in Hollow Creek will stand long after I'm gone, I think. It has stood for over a century, quietly protecting people from dangers they do not even know exist. It will need new caretakers in every generation. People willing to learn the rules, follow them faithfully, and understand that sometimes the most important work is the work nobody ever sees. I am becoming one of those caretakers. I am learning to live in the space between the ordinary world and the supernatural one, to guard the boundary and maintain the balance. It is not the life I planned when I moved to Hollow Creek 6 months ago, but it is the life I have chosen now. And every time I unlock the door to Holloway's Antique Emporium, every time I step into that cluttered showroom with its shadows and secrets, I know I am exactly where I am supposed to be. The rules keep me safe. The rules keep everyone safe, and I will follow them no matter what comes through that door. So that is my story. That is what it is really like to work in a haunted antique shop in a small town where the veil between worlds is thin. If you made it this far, thank you for listening. If this story resonated with you, if it made you look twice at the antique shops in your own town, do me a favor, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who appreciates a good supernatural tale, and leave a comment. Would you have followed those rules? Would you have stayed after learning what the shop really was? I genuinely want to know. because working here has taught me that we all draw our boundaries in different places when it comes to the unknown. Until next time, stay curious, but stay safe.